the Ottomans were so weakened by this stage that they did agree in August of 1912 to these demands. But by then, it was all overtaken by a totally separate development, which was the start of the Balkan Wars, which was when finally, after decades of trying, these small Slav states, Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, and Greece, which wasn't quite Slav, these four states formed a league, the Balkan League, to try and push Turkey out of Europe once and for all. And in September of 1912, so just after this agreement had been made about an Albanian entity within the Turkish Empire, which first of all Montenegro declared war on Turkey, demanding a border change, and then the Bulgarians and the Greeks and the Serbs joined in, and they demanded that Turkey grant autonomy to all its European provinces, which Turkey refused to do, and the Balkan armies then swept through the European Turkey remarkably quickly. The Turkish Empire, despite all the Turkish army, despite all its German training, collapsed very, very quickly. And what happened was Greece was able to take a lot of the territory that's now in northern Greece, and also the great port of Salonika, which became Thessaloniki. Serbia was able to move into large parts of Kosovo, including Prizren and Pristina. Montenegro finally took Kosinje and Plava, and then moved through the mountains and took Peć, and Jakova. And this really, really worried the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Again, Austro-Hungary were very worried about the strengthening of these Slav states in the Balkans. And in the middle of this, in Vlora, Ismail Kemal Bey proclaimed in Vlora an Albanian autonomous state, not an independent state, but an autonomous state. And this was supported by Austria-Hungary because it was worried about the expansion of these Slav states. That was supported be ruled by Serbs, and the powers then met in a conference in London under the chairmanship of the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, and it was decided that there should be in the Balkans an Albanian independent state. This was the first time the great powers agreed that there should be an independent Albania, and the main reason they supported it, above all, was to stop Serbia getting access to the sea, because there were at that point already Serbian troops in Durrës. Anyway, that said, the Balkan War continued because Bulgaria was besieging Edirne, Adrianople, just outside Istanbul, and in a totally crazy enterprise, the prince, or king as he was by then, of Montenegro, King Nikola, was trying to take Shkodra, which he'd always had his eye on, even though the great powers by then were saying that Shkodra had to be part of this new independent Albanian state. In the end, Adrianople, Edirne fell, Shkodra fell, and a settlement was reached in the Treaty of London, whereby it was agreed that the great powers would draw the borders of the new Albanian state. An international peacekeeping force under a British admiral, Admiral Burney, went into Shkodra once the Montenegrins had been pushed out. And in Kosovo, Serbia took most of Kosovo, with Montenegro, and a lot of people forget this, with this place, Peja, and Jakova becoming part of Montenegro. In fact, Jakova was the largest town in the small kingdom of Montenegro at that time. The country that didn't do very well out of this first Balkan War was Bulgaria. They'd borne the brunt of the fighting, but got very little. They'd had ideas of taking Salonika, but that had been taken by the Greeks. They'd had ideas of taking Ohrid and parts of Macedonia, but that had been taken by the Serbs. And so, in perhaps a rather foolhardy mood, Bulgaria suddenly attacked its former allies in what became the Second Balkan War. So Bulgaria went to war with Greece and Serbia, but very rapidly Romania, which hadn't been involved in the First Balkan War, came in to get territory on the Danube and the Black Sea, and the Turks joined in with their former enemies against Bulgaria to get back Edirne and this little bit of European Turkey that we now have just west of Istanbul. The Bulgarians were defeated within a month, and in the Treaty of Bucharest, the arrangements I've described were agreed. Turkey got back its little bit of territory in Europe, and the Bulgarians were left angry and with very little, and you were left here in Kosovo with Serbia occupying most of the country, Montenegro annexing a small part, and then you had this independent state of Albania whose borders were set by the great powers at the end of 1913. Of course, the arrangement didn't last very long, because a year beyond that, the First World War broke out, and you had Austrian troops in Kosovo and Bulgarian troops in Kosovo after 1916. But again, the Balkan Wars, the events of the Balkan Wars were very much driven by European politics, but they were also driven by the activities of the population in Kosovo and the leaders in Kosovo, people like Hasan Bey Pristina, who really weakened the Ottoman Empire so that eventually it was effectively pushed out of Europe. One British MP, who was a great friend of Albania at the time, actually said, in a way, the Albanians before the Balkan Wars pulled the columns of the Ottoman Empire down on their heads. But it explains why we got to a situation where, despite the vision of people like Freshery, despite this idea which kept coming up of an Albanian entity within the Ottoman Empire, in the end you had a Kosovo which was part of Serbia and Montenegro, and an Albania which was forged as a separate state. Sorry, I've talked for much too long. I hope it wasn't totally boring, but I'm very happy to take questions and to go a bit beyond that and into the Yugoslav period, or indeed anything else you'd like to ask me.
And I would like to have your opinion as an ambassador for my question. What do you think about the Conference of London of the ambassadors in London 1912 till 1913 for the issue of Albanian lands? And my second question is, was it correct that division of our land for our people? Thank you.
Welcome you to the European University College of Dukagjini. Thank you for an amazing lecture. We're very honored to have you here. My question is, you talked about the importance of the role of Kosovo in Europe during the year 1985, but always being a part of the Ottoman Empire and the Serbian country. What is your opinion on what would be the role of Kosovo today when Kosovo will be a part of the European Union and not be occupied by other greater countries?
What do I think of EU-Lex? My predecessor is the deputy head of EU-Lex, so I have to be very careful what I say. EU-Lex is, if you like, an experiment. It is the largest civilian mission that the EU has deployed anywhere. It's been a learning experience for the EU, I think, as well as for Kosovo. Of course, the idea has been to try and anchor the rule of law in a brand new state in Southeast Europe. You have judges from judges and lawyers working for EU-Lex from very different legal traditions. You have people from what is generally known as the common law tradition in England and Wales. You have lawyers and judges from the European tradition, the Roman law. I mean, all trying to work together. And I think it's proved a lot more complicated than people hoped at the beginning. I also think that it has proved quite difficult in many cases to get the kind of evidence in the bigger cases that is really necessary to convict people. EULEX also has an executive mandate, which it has been difficult to enforce, particularly in the north, where, as we all know, the local population have denied EULEX freedom of movement. So I think it's fair to say that EULEX has not delivered as much as most of us would like. On the other hand, when I get to the court here in Paya, you see EULEX judges, including at least one British judge I know, working with the local judges to help deliver judgments which are up to European standards, and I think they're doing a very effective job. We look at the customs component of EULEX and the work that it is doing with Kosovo customs, including on the very, very difficult northern border at gates 1 and 31, and also at gate 3 Madare. I think the standards of the Kosovo customs have risen a lot. So I think the EULEX has been able to deliver in a lot of its training role, but in a rather unspectacular way. The areas that have been difficult and have got into the media are things like very high-level cases where people have been accused of corruption, or the use of the executive mandate against organised crime. And organised crime is very strong here in Kosovo, south of the Ibar, as well as in the areas north of the River Ibar. But I think we have to support EULEX. My government supports EULEX. My government puts a lot of money into EULEX, and we believe that it will continue to be necessary to have EULEX for a few more years to come, precisely because of the EU integration process, which is part of the other questions, because there is still some way to go to get the Kosovo legal system up to EU standards, and that will be one of the most difficult questions that comes up in the feasibility study for a stabilisation and association agreement in the autumn of this year. Elections in the north. Serbian elections in Kosovo are obviously a very difficult theme. First of all, position of my government is Resolution 1244, apart from anything else. So if there's any attempt, as it looks as if there will be, to organise local elections in Zubin, Potok and Zvečan, those elections will be regarded as illegal. In fact, Serbian authorities have now said, sort of, that they won't recognise the results of any local elections.